Oh, okay. We're almost ready. Oh, it says we are live. Okay, this is very exciting. Very, very exciting. So good afternoon, well, good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Gaynel Nave, and I'm your host for our weekly Indies of Color panel. Our panel discussion this evening is on mindfulness, and I have some fabulous docs who are joining me this evening to discuss mindfulness and how it is for us people of color as well. So without further ado, I will have our wonderful guests introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Victoria. I'm a naturopathic doctor who just graduated from Bastyr. I will soon be practicing in California to specialize in mental health. And the reason why I'm here today is that I've personally struggled with a lot of mental health struggles. And it actually hit me the hardest when I was in undergrad, when I was studying psychology at the time. Yet I didn't realize I was struggling with mental health issues because of a certain narrative I had in my head that didn't recognize dysfunction and stress for what they were. I eventually found ND and overcame them, but when I went to naturopathic medical school, the immense stress of medical school actually induced more mental health struggles. So I had to relearn a whole nother level how to address stress. So I feel like I have both clinical and personal experiences of overcoming stress, especially with being a person of color.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And next we have Dr. K.
Hi, I'm Dr. K. I practice under the name of Art Cure, and I'm based in Los Angeles, California, but my practice is virtual, so I'm pretty much anywhere. I focus on creatives and creative people who want to live a creative lifestyle and mental health. I write and record custom guided meditations and lead courses, and that's my focus. I also do homeopathy, which I found because I had some issues with grief counseling and it helped me through a lot. So that's also why I practice homeopathy.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Calina. Dr. Calina, you're muted. Let's fix that. Okay.
Sorry, you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Calina. You may know me as Dr. Crystal Williams as well. I am a naturopath. I studied at Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, and I am also a midwife. I've come along on this journey just because I have a personal interest in mental health and being mindful.
Awesome. And then last but not least is Dr. Imani.
Hi, greetings everybody. I am Dr. Imani. I am a naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist. And my story is kind of similar to the other wonderful doctors that we have on this panel, both having personal draw to mindfulness, dealing with anxiety in life and stress and being able to cope with it, especially through mindfulness-based stress reduction. And then I also work with veterans who have PTSD, and having that opportunity to work with them, I like to incorporate mindfulness as a way of having another tool to address the PTSD, the anxiety, the panic attacks, and all of that that comes along with that. So I am glad to be a part of this panel, and thank you.
Awesome. And then I guess I forgot to introduce myself as well. So I am an Arizona licensed naturopathic physician, and my clinical focus is on facilitating women, intersectional women, to reconnect to their identities by addressing their mental health and hormonal health concerns, because the two are very much interlinked. And the medical system as it is does us a great disservice, especially if you're a Black woman, if you're basically a woman of color. And so I'm especially passionate about those things in particular. I too have had my personal experiences with mental health, and the stigma drives me up a wall. And so I'm very excited to dive into this topic with our wonderful guests. So we had polled some questions, or rather specific things that we wanted to talk about today. And I feel that this is a perfect segue into the stigma. So in a lot of our communities, there's a lot of stigma around mental health, about going to a therapist, mindfulness. These terms aren't necessarily ones that we typically use in our day-to-day language. And so when thinking about mental health, how have you, well, let me back up a little bit. What made you want to choose this as your focus, your clinical focus, in terms of like the stigma aspect of things? Who would like to begin? Or maybe I can clarify. The stigma, overcoming the stigma of men within our various cultures around mental health. How about Dr. Victoria?
Oh, I feel like that's a really big question. My personal experience, I feel that so with my story, I have dealt with a lot of both family members and friends ever since growing up, dealing with mental health issues. I feel like I was exposed very early on. In my culture, I'm ethnically Chinese. And mental health is definitely very stigmatized. So for example, I remember my younger brother was born with mental disabilities, and our family didn't talk to us. That side, the Chinese side of the family didn't talk to us for many years because they thought that mental health was due to something you did, or a negative repercussion of some sort. So growing up with that type of like stories being surrounded with was really difficult to navigate what was happening when I was seeing with a personal level with people versus what I was being told. And that dissonance is what really made me intrigued. And I think just seeing people on a one-on-one basis and how just questioning, like, if someone breaks their arm, how come they get all this support and healthcare, but with their mind is very different. I feel like that curiosity is just what drove me towards this field.
Yeah. Anyone else with regards to the stigma around mental health? How about
me?
Oh, sorry.
For me, I've noticed that it's, especially in our community, seen as taboo to have to, or to need to, or want to go see a therapist, which of course is somewhat backwards in our thinking. If you have something wrong, you want someone who can help you with that situation or with that problem. If it were a broken leg, we wouldn't think twice to go and see someone about it. But because it's something that you can't physically see as being broken, of course you can see that someone's struggling mentally, but because it's something that you can't physically put your hands on, to some extent it seems wrong, or it seems as if you can just power through it, or you can make it, you can just mind over matter, some sort of things what we tend to think about. But my desire is to try and change our thought process about how we view mental health, so that we can actually get the help that we need. If not, we'll continue to be in that cycle of, I have a problem, I'm going to try and get over it mentally, and then that mental problem taking you further down.
Right. Yep, it is a cycle. It is a cycle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that from my own personal experience, I grew up in a family that had a few members who dealt with suicidality. I have an uncle who committed suicide, but the story that was told to everyone was that he was murdered, and it was never solved. Because it's something that my community and my family never wanted to address or talk about. And then in my own life, I've had issues with grief, which is something that everyone deals with eventually at some point. And I think that it's just been, depression has been shamed, anxiety has been shamed, but it's so common that we have both of those issues within communities of color and outside of that. Um, but when it comes to access, I think that socioeconomics has a big part to play in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have peers who are of color, but were raised with just more affluence within their immediate family, and they were guided into mental health um, support at younger ages. Whereas now my peers, once we're making our own money, we're choosing to go to therapists. That's what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems, I'm not sure how common that is, but I've seen similarly where I'm really grateful that as time has gone on, the stigma has lessened. So now there's more access. Whereas when we were children, maybe like that story that you shared with your uncle, that must have been really difficult because then there's not that space to really process what that is like for you, know that this person is no longer present. And what are the implications of that person no longer being around? What must have they been experiencing? And just the intricacies of that. And so it's really wonderful that the younger generation are getting access sooner rather than later, because that can only be for the betterment of society as a whole. So yeah, that must have been really hard though, really difficult. Um, Anyone else really with regards to the stigma wanting to mention anything about that?
Well, in terms of the stigma, I think about, and maybe it's at the forefront of my mind because a lot of the patients that I work with are veterans, but I even think about it in terms of my own family. I had an uncle who since passed, but he was a military man and he went to Vietnam and he came back, and kind of what they said in the community was that he was shell shocked, right? That was the term for, you know, kind of what his experience was that encompassed this broad range of kind of mental health effects of having been in this really traumatic situation and exposed to so much violence and just it's unimaginable the types of things that he experienced. And I think of so many of those of his generation that had that same experience. And when they came back, there was very little in the way of services for them in terms of mental health and to deal with different things. And because of that lack, it kind of, there was the stigma around it. And so that stigma didn't allow for even the existence that there could be an issue that needed to be addressed. That was all kind of swept under the rug a lot. And it had effects on other areas of health. It had effects on the different things that a lot of them had to do to try and be able to cope, such as self-medicating with alcohol or other things, and really having a lot of just difficulty in readjusting to life and dealing with the nightmares and the panic attacks and things like that. And now I kind of fast forward to today, and I'm seeing a large number of veteran patients who have PTSD. And there have been, don't get me wrong, there have been great strides made, but there's still a long way to go. But the fact that even they're having some other ways of accessing care, like I see a lot of them with acupuncture, and they're able to get some stress relief from acupuncture. And then a lot of the groups are urging mindfulness and having mindfulness groups and therapy, and that's wonderful. There's still a lot of stigma attached to it though. And so there's still, folks who are in communities where, in communities of color, where there's that stigma exists even as there are a few more services than there were available in previous times. And so I think that everything that we can do, including having discussions like this and just having more awareness, kind of helps to break down that stigma.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. So I'm from Jamaica, and something that I have noticed back home, the importance of saving face and sort of like keeping the peace is a value that is so important to us that when it comes to issues or concerns about mental health, what we can see happening is that we end up being silent about it, not silenced about it, but being silent about it, kind of like what Dr. K shared about with her uncle passing away, where we don't really talk about these things. It's like kind of hush hush, you shouldn't talk about this, like it, if someone passes away in your family, or oh, you're depressed, or just pray about it, um but just like you were saying, Dr. Imani, like the act of talking about these things not reveals, but provides the space to really process it. And by voicing it, it loses its power, because if we keep silent, then shame and guilt end up ruling the show, when they don't really provide much value. They don't allow you to move. Shame keeps you locked up, guilt keeps you locked up. But if you're able to speak about it, you're out of that jail cell. So that is a really important point. I wish we were farther ahead with this, but we'll take what we can bit by bit. Yeah. And so you mentioned something about mindfulness. So for people who haven't heard of mindfulness, or may feel that it is something for richer or whiter folks, how would you define it to someone who this term seems foreign and inaccessible? So, okay, Dr. K.
Okay. I don't know why I keep assuming that I'm not going to go first, but it's fine. For me, mindfulness, I kind of had to redefine it, because definitely it does feel like it belongs in white spaces, which is very incorrect, because I feel like it's a practice that was adopted from cultures of color. But in that, once I kind of got through a little bit of the history, because mindfulness was divorced from a lot of religions, I kind of had to string the two back together for my own practices. But the way that I would define it for a general audience would be to know yourself and to continually relearn how that self-awareness plays into spaces. So I guess an example would be, I consider something like journaling mindfulness, because it helps you reestablish that relationship with yourself. It doesn't have to be super complicated, at least not to start.
Dr. Imani?
So yeah, that the whole notion of mindfulness can oftentimes be, I think, intimidating with a lot of folks, because as you and Dr. K was saying, that the term itself sometimes brings to mind images of things that are a part of that white space and for others, and not for people of color. So when I'm talking to folks about it, sometimes I won't even necessarily say the term mindfulness, but we'll start to kind of engage with mindfulness. And I look at mindfulness as a way of reconnecting. As Dr. K said, kind of reconnecting with self, but also reconnecting with purpose. In some ways, so much of what we can do and this can be caught up in kind of the rat race, so to speak. We're going from A to B to C, and we're rushing to do it, and we've got to get there, got to get it done, and then it's on to something else and on to something else. And so there's so much rush and hecticness that are a part of our daily routines that we often don't get a time to kind of stop and just do something intentionally focusing in on every step of it that we're taking. So that meal that we're eating, right? Are we scarfing it down, or are we really taking the time to think about what it is we're eating, to really taste the flavors, to get the enjoyment of the experience? And so for me, it's about mindfulness. If I had to replace that word with something, I would replace it with reconnection. Reconnection with all of our experiences and with ourselves.
I really like that. Reconnection. Fabulous. How about you, Dr. Victoria?
I definitely agree with what everyone has said so far. It's interesting because mindfulness, sometimes when I think about it, or when I talk to people about that, it gets the same reaction, kind of like meditation, where it's like, oh, I've tried that. Oh, that's a certain culture, that's a certain way of practicing it, and that's just not for me. But I love what you said, Dr. Imani, about reconnection, just reframing it, and how just the act and the practice of mindfulness can look so different for everyone. And it doesn't have to be the same thoughts or the same actions, but as long as you get down to the core of really slowing down and realizing what's happening both in your body and your mind, which I feel that a lot of our cultures, our fast-paced cultures, forget to do. And especially I feel like a lot of cultures of color, we have a very interconnected identity with our culture and who we are and what we're struggling with, that sometimes we forget to look into our individual self, whether that has been taught unconsciously with growing up, or just the way that society has put certain expectations on us. Sometimes we forget to do that. So I love the idea of just stepping back, slowing down, kind of erasing what you think mindfulness could be, and try to explore how incorporating that in your life and what you need and what you're able to do or unable to do. And a little bit can go a long way. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I really like that you went back to our cultural perspective, because in my studies, when we look at the US, if individualism was a culture, America would be it. And the rest of us would exist on this, somewhere in this continuum of being very collectivistic. So somewhere in that middle area. And so for a lot of our cultures, just like what you mentioned, we think of ourselves in terms of our groups or identity. So when you see me, I'm not just me, you see my culture, you see my family, like our parents drill it into us, you're not just yourself, you're representing us. And so when it comes back to that mental health piece, if we become more focused on the group and forget ourselves, then we can inadvertently suffer as a result. And so mindfulness, being present with the self, is fabulous. Fabulous. Dr. Calina, do you have anything to add? Dr. Calina, you are muted. So oh, okay.
Some of you guys have already covered, but for me personally, when I think of mindfulness, I think of being aware. I think of being conscious, being awake, woke, as we would probably say now, to have intention with what you're doing. Those are all words that I would somewhat use interchangeably with mindfulness. How often do we say, are we living in autopilot? you know, I'm getting ready to go to the store, and next thing you know, you're at the store. You don't remember anything between that thought of I'm getting ready to go to the store and getting ready and getting in the car and driving. We don't remember any of those things. Or like Dr. Imani said, you know, you start off, I'm just going to have a little snack, take a couple of bites, and then the next thing you know, you're at the bottom of the bag. How often do we do that? Or we live in a defense mode where we are reacting to everything that's going around us, as opposed to being intentional about what we're doing. I think that that's more of what mindfulness is. It's a state of being aware of how you feel, aware of the things that you see, aware of what you think, aware of how those around you interact with you and your feelings about those interactions. You don't have to do anything about it necessarily. It's literally just being aware, because a lot of times we react based on just, you know, what has come our way, as opposed to taking the time to stop and to realize and be aware of what we're doing.
I think it's important to note for our listeners that, or viewers rather, that we are not saying that this is easy, because it is a relearning, a retraining. It is a returning to self, especially when, as our wonderful panelists have already mentioned, we live in a go, 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 go environment where we sometimes literally have to shut off or box up parts of ourselves so that we can function. It is also important to note that if you're in an active abusive situation, that it will almost be literally impossible to do this, because you are in a state where it is not safe. And so we're not saying that by you being incapable, I shouldn't say incapable, but you not doing this or feeling like you can't do this, that you are somehow less resilient or less capable of healing. That is not what we're saying. We're rather highlighting that this is a tool that can be utilized once you're out of that situation to heal, to improve your resiliency and improve that neural connection between your frontal lobe, which is your decision-making skills, and your limbic system, which is more reactionary and is all about survival. So I just felt like that was important to note. So with that, I feel like it is, this is a really great question that we had written down. So what is the importance of mindfulness? I feel like we sort of answered this somewhat already, but for those who are just joining us, again, our topic is mindfulness, that it's accessible for all of us. It's not just a white space, it's for all of us, and it's about being present. And so with that, I'd like to ask our wonderful guests, what is the importance of mindfulness? Why is it such a big deal?
Dr. Gaynel, to touch on something that you just mentioned about being in a survival state. I think the importance of mindfulness kind of ties in with that idea of being in a survival state. Now, there are times when we are in survival states because it's necessary, right? Because the danger is immediate and we need to focus on that in order to be able to figure out how to survive. But what do we do when our bodies aren't able to recognize when that danger has passed, when it's over, when our bodies continue to stay in that survival state and don't ever get to the rest and relax state? I think that's a time where mindfulness really has such value to offer us, because mindfulness is a way of kind of getting your body out of that sympathetic fight or flight state, right? Especially when that's not needed, when there is a danger that has long since passed, but your body is still attuned to it and you're still keyed up and still responding as if you were in that survival state. Then mindfulness is key for helping us to move out of that state, for helping our bodies to physiologically kind of reset, right? We no longer need all of this that we needed when we had to, look at the idea of, the tiger's in front of us about to eat us, right? So mindfulness as a way of helping the body to reset, especially once we are no longer so much in a survival state, but our bodies don't necessarily realize that they haven't caught up with what's really going on in our lives.
Yes. Thank you for making note of that. I've been reading this book. Do I have it here with me? It's called My Grandmother's Hands. And Resma, the author, talks about how trauma lives within our bodies. And it is exactly that, what you're talking about, Dr. Imani. When we are no longer in that active, stressful, or like dangerous situation, our bodies don't necessarily know that. And so they're still on that autopilot that we talk about. And so mindfulness is a means to have the brain tell the body like, hey, we're not in danger anymore. Hey, you don't need to be on high alert anymore. Hey, you don't need to armor up like we're going to war. Like, you can relax, you can be soft, you can, enjoy the sun. Yes, you have work tomorrow, but work is not danger. And so, yes. Mindfulness is absolutely about you're not in a threatful situation any longer. The present isn't what it was in the past, and we can heal, we can move forward. So thank you for that, Dr. Imani. I feel like, does anyone else have something to add to that?
I have something to add.
Okay.
So with mindfulness, I find it interesting because it's all based on a concept that we learn in naturopathic medicine, how the body and mind are very interconnected. And I realize a lot of people don't realize that and realize how powerful that connection is. And some cultures even don't recognize that the mind is even a player in the stress response. So for example, for someone with trauma, it's interesting how sometimes you can hear a typical story of like, oh, I had a panic attack that came out of nowhere, no clue what happened. But if you look closely, it could be something like, during a traumatic event, there was a certain light or a certain sound or some sensation that happened that your body is very complex and very smart actually to recognize that cue. And so that when it sees it the next time, it sees the pattern and tries to get you out of that dangerous situation. So in a sense, a very cool mechanism that your body can do. But if you don't recognize that happens, then you don't realize that that's that little thing, that sensation that you may not be in tune with, could be setting off those memories of that stress response. So mindfulness, I feel like, is a powerful tool in that way. I mean, it seems like a very benign, like just be more in tune, just be more aware, but it could bring very powerful changes in seeing how your mind and body are connected.
Very, very true, Dr. Victoria. That brought to mind just this past year, 4th of July, there were a lot of firework activities in local communities and neighborhoods. And I want to tell you that whole next day, not even just the next day, but the whole next week, for all of the veteran patients that I saw, so many had been triggered by the sound of those fireworks. And unfortunately, it set off a whole cascade of panic attacks and nightmares and all types of things where their bodies, that sound just took their bodies right back to that place of being in combat, of being, in a life or death situation, right? So it's so true that just those elements of sound or lighting and how they can take our bodies right back to that trauma.
Yes. Any other doctors, anything to add to this point?
Well, I could say something. I think both of you were absolutely correct, Dr. Victoria and Dr. Imani, especially with the veterans and the fireworks. Like, fireworks are designed to be explosions, and then we're celebrating them, but we re-trigger them every single year. I have I have looked for safe spaces in cities when I was in Chicago, when I was in LA, and there's not really any sound-free zones on July 4th. It makes no sense in my mind. But that being said, I also think an important thing about mindfulness is a connection to spirit. So I know that as doctors and professionals, we don't enforce any of our own spiritual beliefs on anyone, but there are a myriad of spiritual beliefs. Even if it's an atheist who kind of believes in a universe, or agnostic, up into people who believe in different, very precise religions with certain prophets, or mediums or intuitives or all of those spaces. And I think that mindfulness actually helps clear a path to better understand that, and to have a healing connection towards it. So when I think about mind body, I believe in that connection, of course. And I think that emotions are kind of a bridge, because I know that Dr. Gaynel will be able to talk about this way more, but hormones play this role in between what you're feeling emotionally, but it's obviously a very physical thing that's happening. But I think that the self-awareness that comes from mindfulness can also play towards, I guess, a more enlightened experience or a higher vibration. Like, we've heard all of these terms, and people are very precise in which ones they use and don't use. But I think that cultivating that also helps cultivate healing.
I am right there with you. Embodied healing, in my opinion, is when we are experiencing wellness, not just the absence of sickness, but wellness, spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. Because as human beings, it's my belief that we're spiritual, existing in a physical plane. And so we have emotions, we have a mind, we have a physical body, we have our spiritual body. And if there's any discord, any disruption that isn't being addressed, then we end up feeling sick. And the cause might be physical, it might be emotional, it might be mental, it might be spiritual. And utilizing mindfulness is a way to like reharmonize, because it brings your awareness to, oh, this is why I feel this way, or this is what I'm experiencing in my body in this moment. Someone said that and I felt butterflies in my stomach, or I felt nauseous, or no, I have a headache, or no, I feel really exhausted after I ate that thing and I feel depressed. Maybe you don't even go to the action point, but it's just bringing that awareness that this is what I'm experiencing in this moment. That is the first step to healing, is being aware. And so then that in and of itself is really huge. It's really huge. It's really huge. Dr. Calina, any thoughts?
No, I didn't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. So, give me one moment here. Okay. So, here's something. So we talked a lot about mindfulness in terms of being present. And we mentioned different ways in which we can utilize it. So for someone who may not have started it as yet, what are some ways that you would suggest to start on this practice, to be more mindful?
I would suggest starting off small. It doesn't have to be something that's really big at first. You don't have to do it for like an hour or anything like that, but maybe just setting aside some time, once or twice a day. Maybe if it's just for 3 to 5 minutes, to just sit, to be in your body, to be aware of where your hands are, where are your feet, what is your breathing like, and to just allow yourself to be in the moment, to be present, to try not to think about anything. Of course, thoughts will come, and when they come, acknowledge them and move on, and return back to your awareness of your breath. What am I feeling in my body? And then from there, it can go longer and longer. And for some people, it may start off, maybe you can't set aside some time each day. Well, just be mindful in the things that you do. I'm waking up. I'm getting ready to brush my teeth. I'm going to brush my teeth for a minute, just being aware. And this is how it feels when the toothbrush is in my mouth. It just starts off very small in terms of just being aware of yourself, your surroundings, and what's going on in your body.
So
I mean,
you go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I guess Dr. K.
I would concur. I think Dr. Calina is right in that starting small and easy is a good way to go. You don't want to jump into like a 10-day silent meditation retreat and I've seen people do that. Don't do that. So I help people with guided visualizations, but that works really well for the creatives I work with because they're already very auditory or very visual. But I think that journaling is something I use with a lot of people, which it doesn't seem like a mindfulness practice unless you know. There's a lot of prompts that you can use to say, oh, I never thought about things this way. And there's something very tactile in writing that pulls you into a present moment. And I think that anything that gets you to be present, even if it's like petting your dog or like watering your plants or, singing your favorite song, going through the process of choosing that. Like you can pick something that someone knows that they like, but don't do enough of, and try to build upon that process of being present to joy. And then I think the rest starts to come.
So one of my favorite ways of having folks to first encounter doing a mindfulness exercise, and one of the ways I even do for myself when I need to kind of reconnect and slow things down, is engaging the senses. And one of the easiest ways that I've found to do that tends to be around food, because it's something that folks are already going to do anyway. They're already going to eat. And so connecting that mindfulness around food. And I have folks to start small. And one of my favorite things to do is to have a mindfulness exercise with an orange. So I'm connecting all of my senses with the orange. I hold the orange in front of me and I am looking at the orange. I'm engaging sight, right? I'm observing all of the little bumps and the little crags of the orange and the little stem where it was attached to the tree, and if it has a navel or not. So I'm actively engaging in looking at the orange, and then I'm feeling it with my hands. And so I'm touching all the little bumps and the knobs and feeling the texture of the skin. And I start to peel it. And then I'm smelling that rich aroma of the orange and those essential oils being released as the skin is peeled, and I'm feeling the texture, and I'm watching a new color kind of emerge from underneath. And then I may even bring it to my nose and kind of inhale that rich aroma. And I'm just mindfully, just really slowly and with purpose and intent, peeling the orange, and then go to touching the orange slice to the lips and feeling how that feels on the lips, and then slowly biting into it, and how does it how does it taste? What's that flavor like? How does it feel in your mouth? Just engaging all of the senses around it. And so without really trying very hard, you become very laser focused in on this one activity, and it connects you with yourself in a way that oftentimes we don't connect on a day-to-day basis. And it didn't require, a whole lot of extra, but it just gave you a way to reconnect and kind of tune in. So I like that. Do it with food, and I've had folks do it with like orange or raisin, or just pick something, pick your favorite food, and go for it. Fully engage in that experience of it.
Dr. Victoria, do you want to add to that?
Um,
Thank you, Dr. Imani, by the way. That was very descriptive. I could actually smell and taste the orange.
Yeah, I love the method Dr. Imani says. I feel that the five senses is something that you can do anywhere. It's free. You can do it anytime. So just practicing at home or outside during times that you're more relaxed, during times you're stressed, like you can just play around with it. And the one thing I love telling people is that, so you kind of beat yourself up like, oh, can't do 15, 20 minutes every day. But even doing 30-second spurts throughout the day, if that's all you can do, that is sufficient. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I really like the five senses. Another way of engaging the five senses, apart from food is a fabulous one because it's really easy to engage all five senses, is if you are in a situation where you are actively being triggered and you feel unsafe, you can utilize the five senses in a different way. So if you don't have food accessible to you, you can basically use your five senses and you can count down, or rather count up, starting with choose a sense. So whether it's your sight, and you choose one thing in the room or in the space that you're in, and you describe it in as much detail as you can. And as you ascend and basically go up to the fifth sense, before you even get to the fifth one, your nervous system will calm down. And so you can touch, that could be touch your clothing or the seat that you're sitting on or some form of furniture that is close by. Smelling, what are you smelling? What do you hear around you? All of those things are another way in which to engage the five senses if you are actively triggered and you don't have food. Yes. So, does mindfulness have to be meditation? Whichever of you would like to speak first, you can go ahead.
I can see people putting so much thought into their answers, but I'll just fill the space. So this is clearly the top of my mind. I think it absolutely doesn't have to be meditation in the way that we commonly define meditation, but then you can have active meditations. So that's where it gets murky for me. If that makes sense. I think the question was written or asked in the spirit of, do I have to sit and like and that's mindfulness? That answer is no. But I think that, sorry, I'm going to switch my system really quick. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. So I think that mindfulness is the overarching term per se, and meditation is one aspect of it, but there's so many forms of meditation that it starts to overlap. I'll just go with that.
Anyone else before I go ahead?
I think mindfulness maybe is a form of meditation, or meditation is a form of mindfulness, I think is the appropriate way to say it. I don't know, I was thinking way too hard on it. But when I think of meditation, I say to myself that I am thinking about something. I am focusing my thoughts on some specific thing, object, whatever the case may be. Yes, it may be guided, but when I'm thinking more about mindfulness, I don't think that I'm thinking about something, more so as I'm just being aware of what is occurring. I think that's more of how I would distinguish the two, although they to some extent, like she said, overlap. If I could try and distinguish between the two.
Dr. Victoria, anything to add?
I feel like everything's been said. I agree with what everyone has said.
Okay. Awesome. How about you, Dr. Imani?
Yeah, I agree. I think especially Dr. K hit in on something when she mentioned that when we hear the term meditation, it calls to mind that whole thing and getting into a particular posture and doing something in particular. And so if that is what people think of as meditation, then no, mindfulness is and that type of meditation don't have to be the same thing. But I guess if we're thinking of, if we kind of broaden our perspective of meditation to include just a time of contemplation, a time of purposeful contemplation, and even that whole idea that we have of clearing our mind, we tend to then kind of focus on something else, whether it's the breath going in and out, or the sounds around us, or with the walking meditation, each step, then I think that has more akin to mindfulness there, with that type of broader perspective on meditation.
I would add that all of what you have shared, I agree with. And to that, I would add that anything could be mindfulness, as long as the way in which you approach it, like we've discussed, is you're intentional, you're in the present, you're being aware. So combing your hair, catering your hair, cooking, seasoning the chicken, or making your favorite dish, seasoning it like you're intently focused on the task at hand, that is mindfulness. If you aren't scarfing down your food and you're sitting down and you're noticing, oh, how does it taste? How does it make me feel? Am I enjoying this or do I not like it? All of those things. Going for a walk, watering your plants. If you have any pets, petting them. If you have any loved ones who are at home with you, giving them a hug, giving yourself a hug. If you have any garments that need to be tailored and you can take, like putting on a button, sewing that button back onto your clothing, that could be a mindfulness activity. Absolutely anything can be a mindfulness activity. It doesn't need to be, like we talked about, sitting in a specific posture, saying or singing hymns. It can be anything. Anything at all. So it doesn't need to be scary. It is absolutely free and accessible to us all. Yeah. So we have another question here. Why don't more doctors talk about this process? And so I'll have Dr. Imani go first.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I wish they did. I wish more doctors talked with their patients about mindfulness, especially because stress plays such a huge role in a lot of the dysfunction and a lot of the dis-ease that we see in the body. Being under chronic stress and having stress hormones just kind of run free reign within our systems, and having that the body to stay in a sympathetic state for far too long, predisposes us to having worse outcomes if there are already some health challenges going on, but can also kind of tip the balance of our bodies into kind of dysfunction and dis-ease. So, the value of doctors introducing this concept of mindfulness to patients and helping patients to be able to connect with mindfulness and incorporating it into their daily lives, I believe could be so so important to improving overall health status. So yeah, I wish it was a part of more doctor visits and more encounters that folks had with the healthcare system. Yeah, mindfulness. Yes, let's do it.
How about you, Dr. K? Thank you, Dr. Imani.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very diplomatic answer, which gave me time to make my own answer diplomatic. Sorry. Okay. So I'm noticing there's also this thread throughout the conversation where we're talking about kind of the two sides of mindfulness, but not acknowledging it. So I just wanted to say, I think that there's people who are approaching mindfulness not because, let me back up. There's people who come to us or other doctors and say, I'm stressed out, I'm constipated, I have chronic headaches, whatever their thing is. And then we say, oh, this mindfulness will help you heal in addition with this, or let's just do the mindfulness because that might be the real, it is usually the root, but okay. So there's that kind of like therapeutic lens on it. But then there are also people who are approaching mindfulness and they don't have necessarily a physical ailment, or they're not in a stress response, although most of us are, or reacting to trauma in that moment, and they have like a spiritual practice around mindfulness. So, but it's still the same mindfulness and approaches. So there's that. But why more doctors don't? I think it's because they're not trained on it. They have no idea of the strength of the connection. They haven't read those studies like we have. So that's a huge part of it. It's never, I never see it as malicious or bad doctoring or something like that. It's just, these are the tools we have. We've been trained that these work for these reasons. That's what we do, and that's what they do. At the same time, I think they may, when they hear the term mindfulness, they think of it only in that spiritual journey way, as opposed to thinking about it in the therapeutic way that all of us have been discussing this whole time. So that is, I think that's why. But I think the importance of it and why I wish more doctors did do it is because any medication or any treatment that I give, whether it's hydrotherapy or homeopathy or plant-based medicine, like all of those things still work differently in every single person. And I need a client who can tell me that. I mean, it works better if they can tell me. So, and mindfulness really helps. So I wish we all had that access to that, but I'm glad that we do. So.
Powerful. Thank you, Dr. K.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Dr. K said. I feel that there are so many types of doctors in our society, and the typical current way of doctoring is just one way. and they are only trained with a certain set of tools. And also we know the statistics about how, an average a doctor visit less than 15 minutes. I feel like it's really difficult in that time to properly have that conversation, not only of introducing it for people who haven't heard that concept before, but also explaining it, explaining how it is a practice. It's not like something you can just prescribe and then good luck with it. It's something that every individual has certain life circumstances that makes it easier or more difficult. That has to be a two-way ongoing conversation to make it something practical that you can actually implement regularly in your life. I feel that if we're looking at the evidence behind it, there's so much evidence that you wonder why it is not being talked more about. But I feel that not only that, and I feel like in healthcare, a big barrier that we have is not only the access to healthcare, but also knowing our options of healthcare, but also within the medical community, knowing what options are out there. And that's why I love how there's a lot more integrative conferences, for example, that are happening where we are just swapping ideas and making those connections. And hopefully the conversation can be more widespread, that when the patient or a client were to come to us, we can have this big toolbox of options for them where mindfulness can come up in that conversation, hopefully with everyone and every doctor they see. Hopefully it'll get there.
Thank you. Dr. Calina?
Yes. So I like to think of it in this way. Is it a lack of training, like Dr. Kim, I think, said, where you just have the tools that you have and you're using them? Is it just out of the lack of knowledge, where where mindfulness is more just starting to come to the forefront, where we're just starting to get more aware of mindfulness? Is it a lack of belief in it? Some people just don't believe that that's going to be helpful. Or is it a lack of personal mindfulness, where we can forget to be mindful? I'm a human being. I can forget to be mindful. We live in a world that is task oriented. Usually in my treatment sheet, I always have a little place for mindfulness to try and help myself to remember, because I'm about what's going on in the room, and sometimes that can be in the back of my mind when you're talking about, I have this gastric upset, and when I eat this, and let me think about my food allergies, and you started to go down a whole nother path. And sometimes you can forget, hey, you need to think about how this makes you feel, or how you're going to be reacting to that. But I may forget, because I'm also, while I'm thinking about this person who's sitting in front of me, I also saying to myself, oh, I have 10 more minutes and then I have to get out of here so that I can get to my next patient, because I don't want to be late for them. It's a whole process. So maybe all of those things contribute to why it isn't talked about as much, because it is going to be something that takes time to cultivate. And we live in a world where we're trying to get it, and we're trying to get it right now. So it's easier for me to talk about these supplements and these things that you're going to be taking and the things that you're going to be doing, because you can see something happening right now before I start to think about, oh yes, and also be aware of how that makes you feel, because, it'll be helpful a week or 2 weeks, down the line as you're starting. So I think that all of those things play a part in it. Not that we don't want to, but it's just, oh yeah, that other thing. And we should start bringing it more to the forefront in what we're doing.
Thank you. I agree with you all that it's a combination of things. Some of it may be due to a lack of belief. Some of it may be due to lack of practice. So not really knowing how to utilize it. The timing aspect is a huge factor, because if you as a clinician only have 15 minutes with your patient, you have to prioritize keeping them alive versus long-term healing. And even if you do present mindfulness as an option, maybe you don't have the time to practice that with them in that moment, and you just provide a handout or a video reference or something like that. And so as naturopathic doctors, we have a lot more time accessible to us to spend that with you as our patients, as our clients. And then the fourth thing, and I think this is also maybe one of the things that I have noticed, is that a lot of people are sleeping. And what I mean by that, we aren't aware, we aren't awake to how we are experiencing things. And so the clinician themselves may not be aware of their internal experiences. And so presenting that as an option to you when they themselves are not utilizing it might bring up, I don't want you to just practice what I preach, I want to walk the talk kind of thing. So, yes. So, anything else, wonderful guests, before we wrap up and give your information again to our viewers? No? You're all good? Oh, Dr. K, you want?
I'm realizing we made it this far and didn't talk much about breath work. I think Dr. Imani mentioned it once. And I know we don't have to go into it. I'm not saying that, but I did just want to acknowledge that, as well as activating all the senses, if you're feeling a moment of triggering, you can focus on deep breathing or do box breathing where you're counting to make an even inhale, hold, and exhale. It does work. And you can also choose that as a daily practice if you're thinking of something that's quick and mindful and free.
Thank you. Alrighty, so I would like for you to again introduce yourselves and give your contact information. For those of you who are joining us later or rewatching the live, their contact information will be in the comments section of this video, or you can head on over to NDs of Color, at NDs of Color. So without further ado, I'll have our wonderful guests reintroduce themselves so that you can know where to hit them up. So again, I'll start in the opposite direction this time. I'll start with Dr. Calina and have her introduce herself once more.
Okay, I am Dr. Calina, that's spelled Drcalina. I am a naturopathic physician and a midwife. You can find me on my website, drcalina.com. You can also find me on Facebook and as well on Instagram.
And what are the handles for Instagram and Facebook? Are they the same at Dr. Calina?
Uh-huh. It is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Calina. Dr. Imani.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, I am Dr. Imani. You can find me or find more information and ways to contact me at my website, DrImaniND.com. That's DrImaniND.com. And you can also find me on Facebook at Imani Owens-Bailey. And I'm located in Tacoma, Washington, and see patients in the Tacoma, Washington, Olympia, Lacey, all that kind of general area. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. K.
Hello again. If you haven't noticed, I'm a little bit goofy, but that's just how I am. My name is Dr. K. Hubbard. I am a practicing naturopath in Los Angeles, California. You can find me at ArtCure on Instagram or on Facebook. It's ARTKURE. And I'm also launching a new meditation series pretty soon. So stay tuned.
Sweet. Thank you very much. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Victoria.
Hi, I'm Dr. Victoria Chan. I'm a naturopathic doctor soon to be practicing in California. My website will be launched actually next month, so stay tuned for that. It is Dr. and then Victoria Chan, CHAN.com. And both my Facebook and Instagram are dr.victoriachan.
Awesome. Thank you. And I am your host, Dr. Gaynel Nave. I am at DrGaynelNave on Facebook and on Instagram, and same spelled out .com for my website. Thank you again for joining us. Please watch, like, and share with those you love and care about. Until next time, have a wonderful week, and remember that you're resilient, capable of healing, and more than your pain. Take care. Thank you.